Welcome to this video of an asynchronous lecture of the course How to Read and Write a Scientific Paper. We are still focusing in this video, like we did in the first one, on the question how to read a scientific paper. In the first video, which is also available like this one on Virtuale, we, in particular, made an experiment of reading together a paper that was co-authored by me. And we selected such a paper on purpose because I, of course, know all the details behind the scene. And I also know what was the feeling of the author when deciding the paper structure and when writing the manuscript. And I think it was interesting to report and to comment also on these author's feelings. Today, I want to make together with you a different experiment. I want to read with you a paper that I have never seen before. I think this is interesting because so we can share our interpretations, starting from the same baseline, which is no knowledge. Of course, we need to be patient with me because I may take some time to get my interpretation of some sentences. So my video will be in a way more realistic with respect to the previous one, but on the other hand, probably less rigorous in terms of structuring my reasoning and my lecturing. It is a first time for me, and it's a first time that I record an asynchronous video by starting from scratch without preparation. But I think that precisely for this reason, for this very reason, it is interesting. So, what is then the paper we are looking to today together with you? And let me share my screen and then select the paper, show to you the paper. So now the screen is shared, and then let's get on the screen the paper. And this is the paper. Let me go to the top of the first page. And the title says already a lot of things. The title is Why Most Published Research Findings Are False. So why did I select this paper? First of all, because I think it's very interesting. I am myself very interested in this paper. And then I think it's very relevant to our course, How to Read and Write a Scientific Paper. Why? Because indeed, one of the key issues when reading a scientific paper that we have to resolve is understanding if the information is interesting and to what extent the information is really objective. It's really presented in a way that is independent of the author personal view, the author feelings. And of course, the more objective the paper is, and the more interesting is the information that is delivered by the paper itself. So indeed, understanding if a scientific paper is reliable is a key question. And I think this reading can provide very useful information to us. So the first question when I try to read a paper is what is the journal? Because sometimes we find the paper over the web by looking for keywords, and then there is a first relevant question, what is the journal? And it is important because it clarifies the field, first of all, and the field of the authors and the field of the journal it published it. And it's also important because we are interested in knowing some more about the profile of the journal. If we want to assess the quality of an information, the profile of the journal is very important. So let's move down in the first page. Usually the information is about the journal is delivered at the bottom of the first page, and you see that it has been published over PLOS Medicine. Well, first of all, it's a paper that was published on a medicine journal, and second information, PLOS is a publishing house with a very good reputation. They publish open access paper. And as I said, they are known for publishing high quality contributions. But let's learn more about PLOS Medicine. Here there is the website of the journal. And what is interesting to see is the visibility of the journal in the related community, scientific community. And usually we can find this information under the menu item about. And you see that here, indeed, they have journal information at the top of the page. Let's look at what is presented here. And there is a lot of information about the scope of the journal, which is very important indeed, because in particular, when we write a scientific paper, it's important to decide what is the most appropriate journal, and the essential information is the scope of the journal. And then they talk about the contents, the criteria for publication. Okay, let's skip this. Editor-in-chief, editorial board. Let's skip this information. It's not relevant to what we are looking for now. And here I find the journal and article metrics. This is what I'm looking for now. And so let's see what they state here. All of our journals have a range of metrics available. What does it mean, a metric? A metric is a measure of the popularity of the journal. These metrics are computed by scientific organizations. Some of them are commercial, other organizations are not, and are presented to the research community by these scientific organizations. The most important sources of information for journal metrics are Scopus, which is maintained by Elsevier, and the Web of Science, which is maintained by Clarivate Analytics. There is also Google providing journal information through Google Scholar. And they write here that indeed several metrics are available by several providers for their journals. And we don't focus on the details of these individual metrics. It's not our purpose here. But what they write here instead is very interesting. We do not consider impact factor to be a reliable or useful metric to assess the performance of individual articles, but will provide the metric to individuals when specifically requested. So they say, we refuse to publicly show these metrics, but we can provide them to you. What is the reason why they don't want to make these metrics immediately available? Let's explore this reason. They write here, metrics for all of our journals, including publication timings and acceptance rate, are available here. So let's click here. Okay, research metrics. There is a first important information. PLOS is a signatory of the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, DORA. This is very interesting. But let's go down and look at the metrics that are presented for PLOS Medicine here. And you see here the metrics for PLOS Medicine. They compute the citation to the journal, and citations are important because they are citations from other scientific papers. It's not specified here how they are computed, but the number, also by comparing with the other journals of PLOS, it's quite high. And then they provide measures which are related to time to the first decision, time to publication, acceptance rate. It's very low. I mean, this acceptance rate is very low. It means that only 3.1% of the submitted papers are published. This is an indicator of the reputation of the journal. And the number of publications so far, very good. But here, let's now understand some more besides the acceptance rate and besides the citations, in order to get more information about the visibility of the journal. And in particular, let's learn some more about this impact factor that they don't want to release immediately, and about this San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment. Let's then click to this link, San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment. And here we needed to look for another link because we're here, PLOS is a signatory of DORA. Okay, let's click here. And here you have the website of DORA and the declaration. Let's see here, read the declaration. The declaration starts by saying there is a pressing need to improve the ways in which the output of scientific research is evaluated by funding agencies, academic institutions, and other parties. Basically, the signatories of this declaration believe that the metrics that were currently used up to when the declaration was signed, these metrics are not a good indicator of the quality of the journal. They are indicators based essentially on the scientific citations, and they say, I'm not reading the declaration, which is quite long, not very long, but quite long. Basically, they say that these indicators that are only based on citations don't reflect the quality of the papers published there. And therefore, they suggest alternative ways of assessing the value of a publication, which is very good. I think this is something that was really, really timely prepared and made available to the research community. Indeed, this declaration turned out to be very popular. If you look at the list of the signatures, there are really many signatures to the declaration. And I think it was indeed a good thing because, scientific assessment is really relevant and it's a challenge and cannot be reduced to an analytical computation of the number of citations or relationships based, quantitative relationships based on the number of citations. And therefore, they propose other ways. However, in order to get an idea of the popularity of the journal, we may want to look for the impact factor. What is this metric that they refer to? And let's then search for impact factor PLOS Medicine. And here, the artificial intelligence overview says that PLOS Medicine has a 2024 journal impact factor of 9.9. Very good. And here you see other metrics, and in particular the ranking Q1. Q1 means quarter one. It means that the journal is placed in the first 25% of the journals related to general and internal medicine that have the higher reputation, computed basing on the journal impact factor actually. So, I mean, this says that if we trust the impact factor, let's forget about how it is computed. You can find this information over the web very easily, but let's just say that if we focused on the journal impact factor and we trust the journal impact factor, this says that the journal is a top level one. Given that we are only interested in getting some baseline information, we are not interested in using this paper for making scientific research, or we don't need to use this paper in an evaluation procedure to evaluate the scientific value of the paper. And therefore, I mean, it's just enough for now to know that according to the impact factor, this is a high quality journal. And in case in your future you get a chance of evaluating critically and in a quantitative way the level of innovation of a research contribution, the value of a research contribution, then my suggestion, get more information on the DORA declaration, the alternative ways of evaluating scientific contributions, and try to make yourself fully informed about this question. What is the value of the scientific reputation of a scientific journal? Now, let's forget about it, because it's we know enough. I mean, this paper was published on a journal that has a good reputation, at least a good reputation. And let's go back to the paper then. And first, we already mentioned that the title is very informative, and I think the author here chose a very good title. It makes myself very curious to read the content. And the second information that I would like to get before starting reading the abstract is the year of publication. It is 2005. So 2005 is not a very old paper, but it's not a very recent one. But that's fine. Let's see what was the opinion of the author at that time. So, summary, let's read the abstract. There is increasing concern that most current published research findings are false. Here the author is a bit exaggerating, because false means something really bad. And we will see that the fact that a research result is false doesn't necessarily imply a bad faith of the author. So I would have preferred to use something like research findings are not fully informative or are not informative. You know, I always prefer to be, in a way, prudent when evaluating the credibility of a research assessment. Anyway, he is very provocative here. And the probability that a research claim is true may depend on study power and bias, the number of other studies on the same question, and importantly, the ratio of true to no relationship among the relationship proved in each scientific field. This is a bit complicated, but let's forget about it. He says basically that depend on several things, the reliability of a paper. In this framework, a research finding is less likely to be true when the studies conducted in a field are smaller. This is very clear. When effect sizes are smaller, so when basically also the size of a specific contribution is small, and it's not very clear, this last sentence, this is my interpretation. Another reason, when there is a greater number and lesser preselection of tested relationship, okay, very good. And then where there is greater flexibility in designs, definitions, outcomes, and analytical modes. Yes, I mean, when we don't strictly refer to rigorous definition, rigorous design, when we don't follow specific protocols, yes, it is more likely that the results are not very informative. I agree. I continue reading. When there is greater financial and other interest and prejudice, at this stage, if I had to read the paper, I would say, okay, let me skip this and let's go to the end of the abstract. Okay, because now he's listing several reasons that may make research findings false. I'm not interested in getting details at this stage during this first pass. So let's go to the last sentences. Simulations show that for most study design and settings, it's more likely for a research claim to be false than true. This is a strong statement, okay? Let's move forward. Moreover, for many current scientific fields, claimed research findings may often be simply accurate measures of the prevailing bias. This is also very strong. In this essay, I discuss the implication of this problem for the conduct and interpretation of research. Fine, what is my understanding of the abstract? Scientific information presented in papers is not necessarily reliable. There are a lot of reasons for making this information not very reliable. And here, indeed, I assume that indeed there is high chance that the reliability of research findings is very low. And I discuss the implication of these problems. Okay, let's move forward with the introduction. Published research findings are sometimes refuted by subsequent evidence with ensuing confusion and disappointment. I agree. On the other hand, science very often grows up by demonstrating that the past findings were not accurate, or at least by expanding the interpretation and relevance of previous not complete results. So that's fine, nothing new. Refutation as controversy is seen across the range of research designs, from clinical trials, traditional epidemiological studies, to the most modern molecular research. Okay, this is fine. There is increasing concern that in modern research, false findings may be the majority or even the vast majority of published research claims. And here there are two citations, 6, 8. And this means that in the list of the references, there are papers that support this sentence, this last sentence. It would be useful, but later on, to look at these references and see if they are related to the same field, other information. But for now, let's skip it. This is our first pass. And that's fine, okay, I understand. You are convinced that there is increasing convincement that the majority of research findings may be not reliable. However, this should not be surprising. Fine. It's not surprising me, because, as I said, science improves step by step. It can be proved that most claimed research findings are false, and here I am examining the key factors that influence this problem and some corollaries. Okay, very good. So I am interested to see what's going on. Let's go to the first section, modeling the framework for false positive findings. Several methodologists have pointed out that the high rate of non-replication, so non-replication of studies, of research discoveries, is a consequence of the convenient yet ill-founded strategy of claiming conclusive research findings solely on the basis of a single study assessed by formal statistical significance, typically for a p-value less than 0.05. The p-value is a statistical measure of the significance of a result. So basically, the author is saying the studies cannot be replicated. Very often, they are based on a single experiment, which is not very significant. Research is not most appropriately represented and summarized by p-values, by the statistical significance. But unfortunately, there is a widespread notion that medical research articles should be interpreted based only on p-values. Okay, here I understand that the author is using the p-value, which is statistical significance, to evaluate the reliability of a result. Basically, he says that the p-value is not a significant measure, and therefore my interpretation is that he wants to question the use of the p-values. At this stage, I get a little bit less interested, because I would like to see an assessment of the reliability of the result that is more general, not just based on a statistical measure. But let's move forward, and I continue reading. Research findings are defined here as any relationship reaching formal statistical significance. For example, e.g., effective interventions, informative predictors, risk factors, or associations. Fine. Negative research is also very useful. Negative is actually a misnomer, and the misinterpretation is widespread. I don't fully understand. Let me move forward. However, here we will target relationships that investigators claim exist, rather than null findings. Okay, so he's focusing on positive results and not negative results. Now I understand that Negative means null findings. I agree with the author that even if an experiment is negative, is interesting, and indeed there is the habit in science to consider deserving publication only experiments that are successful, and then this may force the author to be overly optimistic on the success of their experiment, and therefore they may be tempted to reach conclusion after just one positive result without providing the means for replicability, without testing the results with additional experiments. Here I agree. I understand that here the author is attributing the lack of meaning of presented results, it is attributing it to the fact that the authors want to be optimists, want to achieve success, and therefore may not give the means to replicate their results. I agree. I agree that this pressure that authors receive to obtain something positive may lead to a decrease of the reliability of the results that are presented. As has been shown previously, the probability that a research finding is indeed true depends on the prior probability of being true before doing the study, the statistical power of the study, and the level of statistical significance. So let's forget about this. This is already too detailed for my first pass. And I understand that it is focusing on a statistical approach, but let's forget it. Consider a 2 times 2 table in which research findings are compared against the gold standard of true relationship in a scientific field. In a research field, both true and false hypotheses can be made about the presence of relationships. Let R to be the ratio of the number of true relationships to no relationship among those tested in the field. R is a characteristic of the field and can vary a lot depending on whether the field targets highly likely relationship or searches for only one or a few true relationship among thousands and millions of hypotheses that may be postulated. Let us consider for computational simplicity fields where either there is only one true relationship among many that can be hypothesized, or the power is similar to find any of the several existing true relationships. So basically here he is trying to compute the probability that a tested assumption is successful for a given scientific field. Okay, this is understood by me, so I skip the details that follow because I already understand that he's trying to judge the reliability of the results with a probability. And the probability is also based on a prior probability for the specific field that an experiment is successful. Okay, now, so I am just skipping this. And here is the table, research finding and true relationships. Let me just skip it because, again, these are details I'm not interested in this first pass. What is, let me just go to the first sentence where there is a statement and not a analytical detail. And this sentence is here, I am reading. What is less well appreciated is that bias and the extent of repeated independent testing by different teams or investigators around the globe may further distort this picture and may lead to even smaller probabilities of the research finding being indeed true. So he's saying that, I mean, if there are repeated independent testing by different teams, there is a smaller probability that the findings are true. This is, of course, obvious. So if I make an experiment, only one, it is positive, and then it is replicated by several researchers, then there is an increasing probability that the result is not true. Now, at this stage, we understood that the author is evaluating the reliability of a research finding basing on a statistical assessment. And it's now trying to formalize how this statistical assessment can be carried out within a mathematical statistical framework. And this is indeed interesting, even if I was expecting from this paper a more philosophical interpretation rather than relying to a statistical assessment based on prior probabilities and number of replications of the experiment and so forth. Why I have preferred a philosophical interpretation? The reason is that a philosophical interpretation is more general, while a statistical assessment becomes strictly related to the field. For instance, from my interpretation of what I read so far, I may say that it's not easy to apply a similar approach in my field. Anyway, let's try to move forward, but at this stage, I decided to forget about the statistical details, the details related to the analytical assessment carried out by this author to assess the chance of a research finding to be true. So I am skipping the section dedicated to bias because I see that there is a lot of analytical computation. And I am now trying to get a look at this section, testing by several independent teams. So here, let's read. The several independent teams may be addressing the same sets of research questions. As research efforts are globalized, it is practically the rule that several research teams, often dozens of them, may probe the same or similar questions. And unfortunately, he says, in some areas, the prevailing mentality until now has been to focus on isolated discoveries by single teams and interpret research experiments in isolation. An increasing number of questions have at least one study, claim a research finding, and they receive unilateral attention. So here, once again, the author is stating, and I emphasize once again, is stating that there is a high chance that results are presented based on a single experiment, and therefore my understanding is that he may, at the end of the story, probably advocate for increasing the chance for replicating a study. But again, let's here not look in detail at the mathematical approach, and let's also forget the corollaries because it's related to details. So I am skipping these corollaries. And now there is here a box, an example, science at low pre-study odds. Okay, the box is probably providing an example, but I see that there is some mathematical computation. So again, I'm skipping it. And now I go to the next section. Most research findings are false for most research designs and for most fields. Okay. So first of all, let's start reading. In the described framework, a PPV exceeding 50% is quite difficult to get. What is PPV? I lost in my skipping text the meaning of this acronym. So what I'm doing here is to search for PPV, and then I go back into the article, okay? And let's see, here they use PPV, PPV again, PPV. Okay, PPV, here in the caption I read, here, look at my mouse, in the caption of figure 1, probability that a research finding is true. And this is probably the meaning of PPV, but let me check, because for sure it's also defined in the text. And here, as shown above, the post-study probability that a finding is true, PPV. Okay, so the PPV is the probability that a finding is true. Again, it's a quantitative assessment. That's fine, now I know what is. So basically, the first sentence of this section says that in the described framework, and the framework is the statistical framework to assess the PPV, the probability that a research finding is true is quite difficult to get to the value of 50%. It's quite a low probability. I mean, this means that at least half of the research findings are not true. Table 4 provides the results of simulations using the formula presented earlier. I'm not interested in the formula at this time. So a finding, I am skipping this sentence and I go to the next one, a finding from a well-conducted, adequately powered, randomized, controlled trial starting with a 50% pre-study chance that the intervention, so the intervention is a surgery, for instance, or a medical treatment, that the intervention is effective is eventually true about 85% of the time. I don't understand. Let me just, okay. So basically he says that if there is a proper replication and it's adequately randomized, means that the replication is conducted by independent researcher, and if I start with the pre-experiment chance of the hypothesis to be true of 50%, if I follow this protocol of subsequent experiments independent, then there is a higher probability of success. Okay, that's fine. Again, it looks like they are stating that replicability is important, and I prefer to skip the next sentences because he's stressing again the same concept based on my very quick reading of what follows. And let me just, I am attracted from the last question. Finally, I am attracted by the word finally. So just keep into account this. In discovery-oriented research with massive testing, where tested relationship exceed true ones, 1,000 times, okay? So like, for instance, 30,000 genes tested, of which 30 may be the true culprits, the probability of success for each claimed relationship is extremely low. Interesting. Even with considerable standardization of laboratory and statistical method outcomes and reporting thereof to minimize bias. This means that in this specific field, discovery-oriented research, the situation is even more problematic. So there is extremely low probability that research finding is true. Actually, this is not my field, so I cannot really get an implication for this statement in my field. But it's not relevant during my first assessment. Okay, here I see a sentence, a section titled "Claimed research findings may often be simply accurate measures of the prevailing bias." This means that given that they are not true, these research findings, at least they can serve as an indication of what is the prevailing mistake. Bias means distortion, actually. What is the prevailing mistake that it is done? Okay, I think the title is it's already enough for me. And basically, the author is saying again that, I mean, there is a high chance if rigorous protocols are not followed, if the experiment is not replicated, there is a high chance that something goes wrong here, and the results are not really representative of the reality, but are only representative of possible mistakes that can be done. I mean, it's interesting anyway, but at this time, I think that the title is enough for me. It's also enough for me because I am very attracted by the next section. How can we improve the situation? And I am interested to see in medicine what is proposed the way forward. Is it unavoidable that most research findings are false, or can we improve the situation? Very good. This is a good question. Interesting question. A major problem is that it is impossible to know with 100% certainty what the truth is in any research. Any research experiment is affected by uncertainty, and any research result is affected by uncertainty. Okay, I fully agree. In this regard, the pure gold standard is unattainable. I don't fully agree with this, because the pure gold standard is to make the best research, to reach the best conclusion that can be achieved at the current time, with the current knowledge, the current information, and the best of our capability to make a synthesis. So if I reach the best result that the humankind can reach about a research question at this stage, I'm very happy. I'm very happy. So this is the gold standard for me. And the gold standard is not 100% certainty, according to my interpretation. But still, I think here it's getting very interesting. However, I'm continuing reading. However, there are several approaches to improve the post-study probability, so to improve the reliability of the results. Very good. Let's see what they say here. Better powered evidence, for instance, large studies or low bias meta-analysis, means more refined analysis, may help as it comes closer to the unknown gold standard. Okay, very good. So it means try to provide more evidence and try to be very rigorous. However, large studies may still have biases, and these should be acknowledged and avoided. Okay, so this means that we have to move steps forward. According to my interpretation, this is the meaning of the sentence. We need to move steps forward in recognizing the potential biases and avoid them. So, for instance, we should be more prompt to recognize that several experiments are needed, to recognize that negative experiments are not necessarily disproving the value of the results. This is the meaning of this sentence, and I very much agree. And also, these potential biases should be acknowledged in the paper, maybe in the discussion section. Moreover, large-scale evidence is impossible to obtain for all of the millions and trillions of research questions posed in current research. Okay, that's fine, but I don't understand why this sentence is relevant here. Let's try to read what follows. Large-scale evidence should be targeted for research questions where the pre-study probability is already considerably high, so that a significant research finding will lead to a post-test probability that would be considered quite definitive. I understand now what they mean, and in very simple words, my understanding is there are some research questions that are easier than others, because for some of them we are closer to a reliable result. So we should prioritize these easier research questions. I'm making it very simple. I don't fully agree with that, because sometimes scientific progress is given by impossible targets, and I really believe in impossible targets. So at this stage, I would say, yeah, I understand what the author says, but I don't fully agree. Large-scale evidence is also particularly indicated when it can test major concepts rather than narrow specific questions. Very good, I fully agree. Sometimes the research is focusing on narrow questions instead of focusing on the big picture. And this is due also to the attitude of some authors to produce incremental publishing. meaning that they published one paper for any minor improvement of the same results. And instead of focusing with fewer very meaningful contributions on the big picture, I fully agree. So salami publishing is called, this incremental publishing should be avoided. A negative finding can then refute not only a specific proposed claim, but a whole field or considerable portion thereof. Yes, okay. This is, I agree, even if, I think it's quite unlikely that a negative finding can refute a whole field, but okay, I understand what they mean here. Selecting the performance of large-scale studies based on narrow-minded criteria, such as the marketing promotion of a specific drug, is largely wasted research. This is very specific to medicine, but I very much agree with it, and I think it's very clear. Moreover, one should be cautious that extremely large studies may be more likely to find a formally statistical significant difference for a trivial effect that is not really meaningful, different from the null. This is quite technical. Basically, it means that results that have a low level of significance, if they undergo under extremely large studies, may be more likely these results to end up with a different result. This is my interpretation. But I think it's quite specific. I don't find it very useful for me. Second, most research questions are addressed by many teams, and it is misleading to emphasize the statistically significant findings of any single team. What matters is the totality of the evidence. I fully agree. This is simple. Diminishing bias through enhanced research standards and curtailing of prejudice may also help. Okay, this is quite technical. It means that we also need to work on preconceptions and on implicit biases that may undermine our capability of evaluating the significance of the results. Okay, I agree, even if it's not easy. Preconceptions, dealing with preconception is not easy. However, this may require a change in scientific mentality. Yes, I agree. That might be difficult to achieve, what I just said. Okay, I anticipated this sentence. In some research designs, effort may also be more successful with upfront registration of studies, for instance, randomized trials. Okay, and it is they are promoting randomized trials, independent trials. That's fine. Registration would pose a challenge for hypothesis generating research. I don't understand this sentence, and in particular the meaning of registration. Maybe that it's referring to procedures that are used in the specific field. No worries, it's not important. Some kind of registration or networking of data collections or investigators within fields may be more feasible than registration of each and every hypothesis generating experiment. Again, it looks like very specific. I move forward. Regardless, even if we do not see a great deal of progress with the registration of studies in other fields, the principle of developing and adhering to a protocol could be more widely borrowed from randomized controlled trials. Again, increase the number of experiments, make them independent, and make of this procedure a protocol. Fine. Finally, instead of chasing statistical significance, we should improve our understanding of the range of R values, the pre-study odds, where research effort operate. This is very technical, I forget it. Before running an experiment, investigators should consider what they believe the chances are that they are testing a true rather than a non-true relationship. Yes, this I very much agree. I mean, it's very important, I think, in research to focus on big pictures rather than individual details, what we concluded earlier. And it's also very important that we gain a preliminary estimate of the chances of a tested hypothesis to be true. This helps, and it may look like it is not like that, but I think that preliminary expectation may help to reduce the bias in the evaluation of the results. And better if these preliminary evaluations are done by several teams rather than one individual person or one individual team, but indeed this preliminary expectation is useful. Speculated high R values may sometimes then be ascertained, and I don't understand this because I don't understand what is the meaning for R, but I don't need to get this detail at this stage, so I move forward. As described above, whenever ethically acceptable large studies with minimal bias should be performed on research findings that are considered relatively established. Sorry, I start again because I didn't read well. As described above, whenever ethically acceptable, large studies with minimal bias should be performed on research findings that are considered relatively established to see how often they are indeed confirmed. This is very specific to medicine, where they have also ethical implication when they make experiments, and but I agree with the concept. So basically, they say that large studies should also be performed with minimal bias to test hypotheses that are largely accepted as true. And they say, I suspect several established classics will fail the test. This is interesting. Nevertheless, most new discoveries will continue to stem from hypothesis generating research with low or very low pre-study odds. We should then acknowledge that statistically significant testing in the report of a single study gives only a partial picture. Fine. Without knowing how much testing has been done outside the report and in the relevant field at large. Fine. Despite a large statistical literature for multiple testing corrections, usually it is impossible to decipher how much data dredging by the reporting authors or the other research team has preceded a reported research finding. What is data dredging? Is the selection of the data in order to increase the probability that a research finding is proved to be true. This is not necessarily unethical. There are protocols that suggest, for instance, to remove outliers, to remove data that may be not informative. So it is indeed a procedure that is not unethical, but on the other hand, I very much agree that these procedures should be reported and the implications should be properly evaluated. Even if determining this were feasible, this would not inform us about the pre-study odds. Okay, fine, this doesn't add anything. Thus, it is unavoidable that one should make approximate assumption on how many relationships are expected to be true among those probed across the relevant research fields and research design. The wider field may yield some guidance for estimating this probability for the isolated research project. Experiences from biases detected in other neighboring fields would also be useful to draw upon. I mean, what they are saying here, it's interesting. They say that we should make an approximate evaluation related to the specific field on the success of proving the correctness of a given relationship, a given assumption. Basically, if I refer to water science, it would be very useful to get statistics, getting an idea of how many of what is the percentage of the results that are presented in that field that survive large-scale testing. This is indeed useful to get an idea of what is a prior probability, independent of my research question and independent of my skills of reaching results that they call it here false, but I would say results that are not useful from a research point of view. Let's move to the last question, the last statement. The last statement of a paper, I am expecting it draws a final conclusion, but let's read it. Even though this assumption would be considerably subjective, they would still be very useful in interpreting research claims and putting them in context. I think this is one of the basic conclusions. So let's, now we have finished the first pass, okay? You see here the list of the references, and then we get to the end of the paper. Let's try together to reach a final assessment of this first pass. First of all, my first feeling is that here, a research finding that is proved to be false is false because the author thinks that it is based on a reduced number of experiments. And it is based on also on a reduced number of experiments, not really for bad faith of the authors, but for the need to come to a conclusion with a reasonable timing, with restricted time, within a restricted time span, therefore limiting the opportunity of make independent testing. So the fact that the results are false here is not attributed by the author to cheating, but rather to an attitude of focusing on marginal questions, very narrow questions, an attitude to try to prove that an assumption is true basing on a limited number of experiments, and an attitude of not supporting the replication of the experiment by other researchers. And therefore, what is the result? The result is that at least half of the findings are not reliable, are false. And in order to move forward, the author suggests to increase the opportunity to replicate the results. The author suggests to focus on big pictures, and the author suggests to try to avoid biases by making a preliminary assessment of the probability that an assumption is true. And it is useful, this is the final conclusion, to refer to the specific field to get this probability. So if I see that in my field, 40% of the results turn out to be proved false, and I have a feeling that my assumption that I want to test is probably going to have a larger probability to be proved to be false. So my expectation is maybe I have a 60% chance that my assumption is proved to be false. Then what I should do is to acknowledge this. What I should do is to be as much as possible unbiased in the assessment of the results. And what I should do is to allow other researchers to replicate my results. So I should make the data available, the software available, and provide very detailed instructions on how to run the software, how to make a test for running the software by reproducing my own result, and how to apply the software to independent data to get additional results. This is what they are saying here, according to my first pass. And I also understand that there are a lot of details on the statistical assessment of these probabilities. And I understand that this is quite motivated by an attitude on medicine to evaluate also the significance of the results with a statistical approach. They also have an attitude to make many experiments. In my field, water resources, is not so easy to make many experiments. And actually, I'm not very interested in these details because I think these ways to compute probabilities of research results to be false, these procedures for computing probabilities are very specific. So I couldn't apply them to my field, and therefore I'm not interested in getting into the details. So at this stage, my decision is that I personally will not move to a second pass to get the details about the computations, how the conclusions are reached. And therefore, I mean, this lecture is going to conclude now because we are not moving to the second pass. It may be nice if you, with this paper or another paper, instead tried to make an exercise to gain a full understanding. It happens to me many times to go through the details of a paper. You may start with a simple paper. I think this one that we used is simple, but it's not the simpler paper in terms of analytical details, which I can think of. I think that probably I am biased, but I think that my paper on the Po River is probably easier in order to get the details, but maybe I am biased because, of course, I know already that. And finally, I would like to make a concluding remark. Actually, if I didn't read the timing, the date of publication of this paper, I would have guessed that it was published at least 20 years ago, because many of the suggestions that are given here became meanwhile true. So there are several journals nowadays that require that when we present results, we make the data available, software available, in order to fully allow other authors to reproduce the results. We already discussed this in my first video, but I really would like to stress once again the concept. After the DORA declaration and after subsequent evolutions of the publishing, scientific publishing, which is very different now with respect to 20 years ago, very different. After these evolutions, indeed, there are very strict requirements in order to allow other researchers to replicate the results. Actually, it doesn't happen frequently. And I mean, I would be very excited if a large number of teams repeated my research questions, my research experiments. But actually, it's very difficult. Maybe it's difficult because my research results are not so interesting. This is for sure a possibility. But I also think that it's difficult because you know, replicating research results is something that doesn't give a real benefit in terms of scientific outputs. Very often, I get review reports where people say, oh, but this is just a replication of the previous study. So I think that in order to improve the situation, in order to reduce the number of unreliable research findings that are presented, we need also to work on the procedures for scientific assessment in terms of paper evaluation, submitted papers, In terms of academic promotion, we should give reward to the researchers who spend time to replicate results obtained by others. And if this replication is done in a rigorous way, it's really a useful scientific contribution. So after this second lecture, now you know that there are good reasons for scientific results being unreliable. And therefore, there are very good reasons for you to make an effort to evaluate the value of scientific papers. I hope that this video is helpful to get to target for you in this respect. Thank you very much, and let me just share the screen so you can see my face. Again, thank you very much, and please look forward to the next videos. All the best. Ciao.